Eleanor Whitmore adjusted her reading glasses and looked across the breakfast table at her son Marcus, who was scrolling through his phone with the same dismissive expression he'd worn since turning 18. The morning light filtered through the kitchen window of their modest two-bedroom apartment, casting shadows across the worn linoleum floor. "You know what, Mom?" Marcus said without looking up, his voice dripping with disdain. "You're pathetic, living in this dump, working your little minimum-wage job, pretending like you matter. Face it, you're going to die alone and poor, and nobody's going to care." Eleanor's coffee cup trembled slightly in her hands, but she said nothing. If only he knew the truth. "I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss." Eleanor had always been an early riser. At 58, she found comfort in the quiet hours before dawn, when the world. What's gotten into you? A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Marcus practically bounced into the living room, his eyes bright with an enthusiasm that had been absent for so long Eleanor barely recognized it. "I'm getting married." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Eleanor felt her crossword puzzle slip from her fingers as she stared at her son in bewilderment. "You're what? Married? I'm getting married." Marcus thrust his phone toward her, showing her a photo of a young woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and expensive-looking jewelry. "This is Brittany Ashford. Her father owns Ashford Industries, you know, the construction company that's building all those luxury condos downtown." Eleanor studied the photo, trying to process this sudden turn of events. The woman looked polished and sophisticated, everything Marcus usually claimed to want but had never seemed capable of attracting. She was beautiful, certainly, but there was something cold in her smile that made Eleanor uneasy. How did you even meet her?" "At the country club last month. Remember when I went to that networking event with Kevin?" Marcus was pacing now, his excitement making him restless. "She was there with her friends, and we just clicked. Mom, she's amazing. She's beautiful, she's rich, and she actually gets me. She understands that I'm meant for something bigger than this." He gestured dismissively at their modest surroundings. Eleanor felt a familiar pang of hurt at his casual dismissal of their home, but she pushed it aside. "Marcus, this is very sudden. Are you sure you're ready for such a big commitment?" "Ready? Mom, I've never been more ready for anything in my life. They're used to a certain level of society, you know? The wedding is going to be a high-class affair, very exclusive." The meaning behind his words was clear, even if he didn't have the courage to say it directly. Eleanor felt her heart sink, but she kept her expression neutral. "I understand. I knew you would." Marcus's relief was palpable. "You've always been so understanding, Mom. That's why I know you'll be happy for me. This is everything I've ever wanted." Over the following days, Marcus's behavior became increasingly erratic. He would disappear for hours at a time, claiming to be meeting with Brittany or her family, the poverty-stricken nobody we thought she was. And if that's true, it changes everything about our arrangement. The arrangement in question was elegantly simple and utterly ruthless. Marcus, desperate to present himself as worthy of the Ashford family, had been borrowing money at increasingly unfavorable terms to maintain his facade. Designer clothes, expensive dinners, lease payments on a BMW he couldn't afford, all of it financed through a web of loans that Brittany had helpfully connected him with through her family friends. What Marcus didn't know was that those friends were owned by Richard Ashford. The interest rates were usurious, the terms were predatory, and the collateral agreements contained clauses that would essentially make Marcus an indentured servant to the Ashford family for the rest of his life. It was a variation on a scheme Richard had perfected over the years. Identify ambitious but naive young people from modest backgrounds, dangle the promise of wealth and status, then trap them in financial obligations that made them completely dependent on Ashford family largesse. Marcus was supposed to be wife number 4 for Brittany, each marriage carefully calculated to expand the family's influence and control. But if Eleanor Whitmore was actually wealthy, if she had resources that could potentially free Marcus from their carefully constructed trap, then the entire plan needed revision. "How much are we talking about?" Richard asked. Vincent consulted his notes. "Based on the firms involved and the level of security around the information, I'd estimate we're looking at a portfolio worth at least $50 million, possibly more. The fact that it's been kept completely secret suggests sophisticated tax planning and wealth preservation strategies." Brittany stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city she planned to own someday. "The question is, does Marcus know?" "Based on my surveillance, absolutely not," Vincent replied. "The boy continues to accumulate debt and continues to stress about maintaining his life speed with which everything was moving." "A month from announcement to wedding?" Jonathan shook his head. "Eleanor, that's not romance. That's a business transaction." "I know, but what kind of business could they possibly have with Marcus? He has nothing to offer." "He has you." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Eleanor felt her blood run cold. "You think they know?" "I think someone's been digging. The question is how much they've discovered." Jonathan pulled out his phone. "I'm going to make some calls. If someone is investigating you, I need to know who and what they've found." While Jonathan worked his network of contacts in the financial world, Eleanor sat in her kitchen, staring at the chipped ceramic mug that had been her companion through so many quiet mornings. The life she'd built, the careful anonymity she'd maintained for nearly 3 decades, was crumbling around her. "Eleanor," Jonathan said, returning to the kitchen with a grim expression, "I've got bad news. Someone's been making inquiries about Thomas's estate. Unofficial inquiries, but persistent ones. They've been trying to access sealed court records, investigating the companies that handle your investments. How much do they know? Enough to know you're not what you appear to be. They haven't gotten specific numbers yet, but they know Hartwell Morrison handles your portfolio. That's enough for someone with resources to make educated guesses." Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 28 years of careful planning pressing down on her. "What do we do?" "First, we need to know what Marcus has gotten himself into. Do you have access to his financial information?" Eleanor hesitated. Searching through Marcus's belongings had felt like a violation, but this was different. This was about protecting him from forces he didn't understand. "I found some credit card statements. The balances were enormous, much more than he could afford. I need to see them." Eleanor retrieved the hidden bills from Marcus's room, and Jonathan's expression grew increasingly dark as he reviewed them. "Eleanor, these aren't just credit cards. These are private loans with—" "How could he possibly owe that much?" "Because someone wanted him to owe that much. Eleanor, your son has been set up. These loans are designed to be impossible to repay under normal circumstances. They're a trap." Eleanor felt sick. But why? What could they possibly gain from destroying Marcus financially? Jonathan was quiet for a long moment, studying the loan documents with the intensity of a forensic accountant. Control. If Marcus can't repay these loans, he becomes completely dependent on the Ashford family. He'll be forced to do whatever they want, work for whatever they're willing to pay, accept whatever role they assign him. And if they know about my money, then they're probably hoping you'll bail him out, which would expose your assets and make you vulnerable to their influence as well. It's a win-win for them. Either they control Marcus through debt, or they gain access to your fortune through his relationship with you. Eleanor stood and walked to the window, looking out at the street where she'd lived anonymously for so many years. "There's something else, Jonathan. Something I haven't told you about." "What about it?" "The character requirements for Marcus's inheritance. I've been watching him, evaluating him, for years. And he's failing every test." Jonathan's expression was sympathetic but unsurprised. "I know, Eleanor. I've seen the reports from the private investigator you hired." Eleanor turned to face him. "You know about that? You asked me to handle the payments, remember? Daniel Morrison has been providing quarterly reports on Marcus's behavior for the past 5 years. Daniel Morrison was a retired police detective who specialized in discreet background investigations. Eleanor had hired him to document Marcus's treatment of others, particularly those he perceived as beneath his social status. The reports made for depressing reading. "Based on his current behavior," Eleanor said slowly, "Marcus wouldn't inherit anything under the terms of my will. He's cruel to service workers, The business has been losing money, and he's been borrowing heavily against his assets. A man in his position, facing financial pressure, might be desperate enough to take significant risks to access new sources of capital. You think he's using Brittany to target wealthy families because he needs the money? I think Richard Ashford is a cornered animal, and cornered animals are the most dangerous kind. After Jonathan left, Eleanor sat alone in her kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of the trap that was closing around her son. Outside, she could see the black sedan had returned, its tinted windows reflecting the streetlights like dead eyes. For 28 years, she'd lived two lives: the public life of Eleanor Whitmore, hardware store clerk and struggling single mother, and the private life of Eleanor Whitmore, inheritor of a tech fortune worth hundreds of millions of dollars. She'd done it to protect Marcus, to ensure he developed character independent of wealth, to give him the chance to become worthy of the fortune that would someday be his. But now those two lives were colliding, and Eleanor realized that all her careful planning might not be enough to save her son from the consequences of his own choices, or from the predators who were using those choices against him. The phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. Marcus's voice was strained, desperate. Mom, I need to talk to you. Something's wrong. Something's really wrong, and I don't know what to do." Eleanor's heart raced. "Marcus, where are you?" "I'm coming home. Mom, I think I've made a terrible mistake." Marcus burst through the apartment door at 11:30 that night, his face pale and his hands shaking. Eleanor had been pacing the living room since his call, and the sight of her son's obvious distress sent a spike of maternal terror through her heart. "Marcus, what's happened?" The door was slightly open, and I could hear Mr. Ashford talking to someone. At first, I wasn't really paying attention, but then I heard my name. Eleanor's stomach dropped. "What did you hear?" "Everything, Mom. I heard everything." Marcus looked up at her with eyes full of pain and humiliation. "Mr. Ashford was talking to this guy Vincent about me. About us. They know things, Mom. Things about our finances, about where we live, about your job. They've been watching us." Eleanor tried to keep her expression neutral, but inside, her mind was racing. How much had Marcus overheard? Did he know about her hidden wealth? "They called me a mark, Mom. Said I was the easiest target they'd ever worked with, because I was so desperate to escape my circumstances. They laughed about how I'd been borrowing money to try to impress them, and said it was pathetic how hard I was trying to be something I'm not." The pain in Marcus's voice was raw, genuine. Eleanor had never seen him so vulnerable, so straight. "Mom," I realized himself, dressed casually, but radiating the kind of quiet menace that came with decades of wielding power over others. "Marcus, my boy," Richard said with false joviality. "Running away from the family so close to the wedding? That's not very sporting of you." "I heard you talking," Marcus said, trying to stand tall despite his obvious fear. "I know what this really is. I'm not marrying Brittany." Richard's smile never wavered. "Oh, but you are. You see, Marcus, you signed certain agreements when you took our money. Legal agreements that are quite binding. Vincent, show him the paperwork." Vincent produced a thick folder and spread several documents on Eleanor's coffee table. Even from across the room, Eleanor could see they were covered in dense legal text and official-looking seals. "Personal services contract," Vincent explained in his gravelly voice. "Indentured servitude agreement. Collateral assignment of future earnings. Your boy here didn't just borrow money, Mrs. Whitmore. He sold himself." Eleanor stepped forward, her protective instincts overriding her caution. "You can't hold him to contracts signed under false pretenses. He didn't understand what he was agreeing to." Richard turned his attention to Eleanor for the first time, and his eyes held the cold calculation of a predator sizing up new prey. The famous Eleanor Whitmore. We've been so curious about you." "I don't know what you mean." "Don't you?" "Let's see. Widow of Thomas Whitmore, inheritor of significant tech patents, current net worth somewhere north of $50 million. Did I miss anything?" The words hit the room like a bomb. Marcus spun to stare at his mother, his face turning to Eleanor with devastation written across his face. Eleanor's heart was breaking. Everything she'd tried to protect, everything she'd worked toward for decades, was being destroyed in front of her eyes. Marcus, yes, it's true, but not the way he's making it sound. I was waiting for you to… To what? To grovel enough for your approval? To prove I was worthy of money that should have been mine by right? Richard stepped between them, his voice smooth and reasonable. Marcus, I understand your anger. Your mother has been manipulating you your entire adult life, keeping you in poverty while she sat on a fortune. But here's the thing, it doesn't matter anymore. He pulled out another document, this one bearing official court seals. You see, when someone defaults on the kind of agreements you signed, when they fail to meet their obligations to the Ashford family, we have legal remedies. This is a writ of attachment. As of tomorrow morning, we will have legal control over any assets you might inherit, any gifts that might be given to you, any financial support you might receive. Eleanor read the document over Richard's shoulder. The word hit Eleanor like a physical blow. Marcus. It wasn't manipulation. He was already moving toward his room, and Eleanor could see the determination in his posture. He was going to leave, and nothing she said would stop him. Where will you go? She asked, following him. I don't know, maybe I'll get a job somewhere far from here. Manual labor. Something honest, where I can't hurt anyone but myself if I screw up. He was throwing clothes into a duffel bag with shaking hands. Mom, for the first time in my life, I understand what you were trying on Eleanor's kitchen table that read, Thank you for never giving up on me, even when I gave up on myself. I'll come back when I'm ready to be the son you deserve. Eleanor sat alone in her apartment, surrounded by the detritus of the evening's confrontation. FBI evidence markers, legal documents from the Ashfords' failed scheme, and the overwhelming silence of her son's absence. Jonathan found her there the next morning, still sitting at her kitchen table staring at Marcus's note. Any word from him? Eleanor realized that her 28-year plan had worked in ways she'd never expected. She'd set out to ensure that Marcus would be worthy of great wealth. Instead, she'd raised a son who was worthy of something much more important, a life lived with integrity, compassion, and love. The money would always be there, waiting for him when he was ready. But the man walking beside her, the son who had risked everything to help someone he thought was in need, was worth more than any fortune. Behind them, Brittany's screams of rage echoed through the marble halls of the country club, but Eleanor didn't look back. She was too busy looking forward to the future she and Marcus would build together, not as inheritor and benefactor, but as mother and son who had finally found their way back to each other. The real inheritance, Eleanor realized, wasn't money at all. It was the relationship they were about to rebuild, based on truth, forgiveness, and the kind of love that didn't come with conditions or tests. But as they reached Eleanor's car, Marcus stopped and turned to face the country club one last time. Police cars were pulling up to the entrance, and through the windows, they could see Brittany being led away in handcuffs, her expensive wedding dress trailing behind her like a broken dream. Mom, Marcus said, his voice still thick but growing clearer by the minute. I need to tell you something. We'll be there when you're ready for it. If you're ever ready for it. Marcus, you've already proven yourself to be worthy of far more than any inheritance. You've proven yourself to be a good man with a kind heart. That's all I ever really wanted. As they drove away from the Grandview Country Club, Eleanor's phone began ringing with calls from reporters who had somehow already gotten wind of the dramatic wedding interruption. She turned the phone off and smiled at Marcus. You know, she said, I think Mr. Henderson is going to want to hear this whole story, and I have a feeling he's going to be very proud of both of us. Marcus laughed, a sound Eleanor hadn't heard in far too long. Mom, can I ask you something? Anything. When we get home, can you make those pancakes? The ones we used to have on Saturday mornings when I was little? Eleanor felt her heart swell with joy. Honey, I thought you'd never ask. The real inheritance, Eleanor realized, wasn't money at all. It was the relationship they were about to rebuild, based on truth, forgiveness, and the kind of love that didn't come with conditions or tests. It was Saturday morning pancakes and honest conversations, and the chance to start over with wisdom earned through pain. And that, she thought as they stepped out into the afternoon sunlight, was worth infinitely more than $50 million. Because at the end of the day, what good was all the money in the world if you had no one to share it with? What good were fancy losing my son? And how is Marcus doing now? He's wonderful. He's been helping Mr. Henderson with deliveries and inventory. Yesterday, he spent 3 hours helping an elderly customer rebuild his back porch steps, and he wouldn't accept a tip. Said the satisfaction of helping was payment enough. Mrs. Patterson's eyes teared up. "Oh, Eleanor, you must be so proud." "I am, but more than that, I'm grateful. We're getting to know each other all over again, but this time as adults who choose to be in each other's lives, not just because we're family." That evening, Eleanor walked home to find Marcus in the kitchen, already preparing dinner. He'd taken over most of the cooking duties, claiming he wanted to learn how to take care of himself properly. The apartment smelled of garlic and herbs, and Eleanor could hear soft jazz playing from his phone. "Smells amazing in here," she said, setting down her purse. "I'm trying that chicken recipe you used to make when I was 10. The one with the lemon and rosemary?" Marcus looked up from the stove, his face animated with concentration. "I called Aunt Patricia for the exact measurements because I wanted to get it right." Eleanor's heart warmed. Patricia had been delighted when Eleanor called to tell her about Marcus's transformation. "And what did your aunt have to say?" Marcus grinned. "She said, and I quote, 'It's about damn time that boy came to his senses.' Then she invited us both to visit her in California next month. She wants to meet the new me, as she put it. Would you like that, to visit Patricia?" "I'd love it. But Mom, there's something else I want to talk to you about." Marcus turned down the heat and faced her. "I've been thinking about the inheritance, about Thomas's patents and all that money." Eleanor's stomach tightened. They'd had several. I needed to see him helping people who couldn't give him anything in return. Eleanor smiled at the memory. "He spent our entire first date serving meals and talking to homeless veterans about their service. I fell in love with him that day, not because of his intelligence, but because of his heart." "What happened to him? You've never told me the details." Eleanor's voice grew quiet. "Car accident. He was driving home from a meeting with investors who wanted to buy his company. The irony was that he'd finally agreed to sell because he wanted to start a foundation that would provide technology resources to underserved communities. It would require business skills, legal knowledge, financial expertise, where secrets were kept or tests were administered in silence. It had become what Eleanor had always wanted it to be, a home where love was expressed freely, where dreams were shared openly, and where two people who had found their way back to each other could plan for a future built on purpose rather than profit. Tomorrow would bring new applications to review for the foundation, new students to teach at the community center, new customers to help at the hardware store. But tonight, Eleanor fell asleep knowing that the most important work of her life was complete. She had raised a son who understood that true inheritance isn't about what you receive, it's about what you give away. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.